Cool. Well, let's start it off, and we'll jump right in. So, thank you everyone for joining the session today. I've been very excited to be speaking with Lynsey Copping today. One of the things that we really wanted to talk about is, how do you do CFO at a crypto startup? And I don't think there could be anybody better than to have Lynsey Copping here to talk about her experience. So, just before we get into it. Bit of background, my name is Ben Davis. I'm the head of digital assets at Superscript. We are an insurance broker, and my team exclusively focuses on the digital asset and crypto space. I've been doing crypto insurance for about 6 years now, and it is incredible passion. And the industry is, I think, crying out for more risk management, which we'll definitely talk about today. I'm so happy to have Lynsey Copping here today. And Lynsey, I'd love to get a bit of a brief background of your career. And for those of you who might not know what M2 is, just a bit of an overview of M2 and the company.
Thank you. Nice to be speaking with you, Ben. Thank you for having me. So I'll start right from the beginning of my career. So I trained as a chartered accountant with EY in London, and then straight away moved into investment banking, product control. Spent about 5 years with UBS in London and New York. Then I moved to the UAE with Deutsche Bank back in 2006 and spent 9 years with them. When I moved here, it was very, very small. We had one entity, 30 people, and over my time with them, grew to about 175 people.
Wow.
I helped set up, I think it was 5 or 6 entities in the region. We gained different licenses under the different regulators across all the areas of the bank. So after my 9 years with them, I moved to an oil futures exchange for 5 years, which was majority owned by the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And then in late 2019, I was approached and moved into the crypto world early 2020. And I've helped set up, this is now my 3rd crypto exchange. I joined M2 about 18 months ago. I was one of the top 10 and first 10 employees. And M2 is, we're a group of companies that we offer, we're basically an investment platform for crypto. So we have exchanges, we have licenses in Bahamas, and we have licenses in Abu Dhabi, in the Abu Dhabi global markets. We offer products such as, usual spot trading, but we have our earned products, lending, futures. So that's a bit of background about me and M2.
And so obviously you had your background was from traditional finance at the beginning. So what was the hook? What pulled you into the crypto economy?
The crypto world. I'd spent a lot of time looking at different product areas across investment banking, and I was actually approached to move across to the crypto world. And it was something that I didn't really know much about back then. And I figured that the world was moving that way. And I was just super interested to learn something else and move into a world where I knew that even the traditional banking would move into sometime in the future. So I took the risk and made the jump.
Yeah, and how's it been?
Challenging, interesting. Yeah. It's been a bit of a roller coaster. The first exchange that I joined, it didn't succeed. It went into liquidation. That was quite difficult, managing a company that was struggling, learning all the new things, setting things up from scratch. It was very, very different from the banking world, where you exist in an organization that all the processes are in place, the systems are there. There's people around, there's 80,000 people that you can ask if you don't know something. Yep. You come to small startups, you're the one making decisions, you're trying to figure it out. So it's been very, very challenging, but really, really rewarding.
If you're talking to a finance professional that's currently in traditional finance, that's looking to make the jump in crypto, any words of wisdom or pearls of, that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what sort of person you are.
Yeah.
If you're moving into the startup world, you have to be a particular sort of person. You can't be the sort of person that wants to go to work and just do your job and leave. You have to be able to get your hands dirty and be willing to get your hands dirty. So you end up doing all sorts of things. I'm a CFO. I still, post invoices, for example. I get involved in the debits and credits, like the real basic stuff. But take the challenge. If you're interested to learn and you like being challenged on a daily basis, this is the way the world's moving. And it's very exciting because there's lots of different ways that we can develop products, which are sometimes more in line with the investment banking world, the traditional finance world, but you can do other things with them. So it's actually a really, really interesting space.
And, you know, that's such a good point. And I think at a previous conversation we were talking, we kind of said, it's really interesting. A lot of crypto companies are jumping headfirst into crypto. And actually, once they do that, they kind of move backwards and start becoming more kind of traditional almost. And then the traditional guys are kind of realizing, oh, we're actually losing loads of value because we're not addressing the crypto side. And they're trying to become, so there's kind of this like convergence of both of the different ways of doing it. And I think you kind of mentioned before that M2 is kind of on that same trajectory, right? It's becoming more kind of banking, investment banking with obviously within crypto.
Yeah, exactly. We're starting to offer some more of those traditional finance type of products. Yeah. And we're in a very heavily regulated space. So actually the way we operate has to be a bit more in line with the traditional finance, the banks, you know, that operate under these regulatory environments, because there are ways to do things that we have to abide by regulatory restrictions. So we have to be very careful. So it's important to have those people with that very structured knowledge and background to make sure that the controls are in place. So we're doing things in accordance with regulations.
Yeah, it's one of those things where actually, you know, there's a lot of people that think, you know, we have to throw out the entire traditional financial system, you know, can it all, we're starting from scratch. But actually, there are some good things about that system, right? Like the system largely, you know, there are some exceptions, but the system currently is set up to manage risk better than the crypto industry. And as we've seen through FTX and a number of different events, risk management is the difference between, you know, operating a profitable business or going bankrupt and potentially going to jail, right? Like directors, if you're a director of a business, you take on personal liability for the operations of that business. And so I think that's one of the things that we've been really interested in kind of pushing with our clients, is talking about, well, you know, yes, we get that you are on the, you know, trying to change things with crypto, but there's actually some really great lessons that we can kind of go through together and help you with, because actually the traditional world, they do right things, right? Like we don't have to can everything, right?
And I think also very important in that conversation is it's client assets that we are holding and that, you know, we're investing in some instances. So it's really, really important that we do have these risk management processes in place to make sure that we protect the client assets and the client money, which I think comes back to, again, being very heavily regulated. It just puts more stringent processes and controls in place to make sure that we do have those protections there.
And just to go back on what you had mentioned in your background on joining companies and then basically being there for that explosive growth, and you're doing the same thing at M2. You know, you mentioned you've been, I think, employee 10, and now I think you mentioned before in an earlier conversation that you've got 250 employees now. I mean, wow, that's incredible growth in a year. How have you, like, first of all, how do you manage that, right? As a CFO, how do you manage, you know, that incredible swell of colleagues and teammates now coming into the company and managing onboarding? And obviously, when you grow a company that quickly, things get more complex, right? You've got more communication that needs to happen and more things. And as you're not only growing the employee base, but you're probably adding more products and services and doing different things like that. So how has that been managing all that?
It's sometimes a bit of a juggling act. You know, you want people through the door, but you don't have all the processes in place. Sometimes the processes lag the growth. I think it's really just getting the right people in place to make sure that there's a vision as to how this growth happens, how we onboard people successfully, how we communicate successfully. I think communication is the really, really important thing, because when you're 17 people, it's very easy to communicate. When you're 250 people and you're spread in various locations, it gets much harder. I think for me, I'm sort of in the middle of the organization for many, many reasons. From a product side, when we're implementing new products and we're looking at how we integrate with the ledger, or when we're talking about payroll, people have to come to the finance department. So in terms of, we get to know pretty much everybody, which is good. And sometimes I find that when we're talking about launching new products and looking at building new processes, I'm almost the person who connects different parts of the business, because I'm like, you haven't thought about that side, but you've thought about your side. So I think it's just really important to try and keep people talking, because it tends to be the lack of communication that where processes break down and somebody doesn't know about something, and then something's been rolled out or something's been built, and then you have to pick up the pieces a little bit later. So we've obviously had those challenges internally ourselves. I think we're moving to a place where we're getting much more streamlined in some of the product rollouts and the processes that we have, but it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, so you're kind of wearing the COO or operations hat as well. So like, would you say, like, if there's CFOs on the call today, would you say that like one piece of advice or wisdom is to kind of help facilitate that communication, as you have done, for them to kind of think about collaboration across the company?
I think it's really important, because ultimately everything that happens in the business ends up in our financial statements somewhere, somehow. So if we don't know about it, then we're missing something. So I think for a CFO, it's really, really, really important that you're having that communication across all the areas, but also not just you with those, the operations team or the product team, but even making sure that all of those teams all speak together. Because we found that when we get in a room and talk with all of us, with the communication, things are just much more streamlined. They're much easier to thrash out decisions or to understand processes. When it's siloed conversations, things take longer. It just doesn't work as well as it should do.
It's so interesting when you said, like, what you're doing as a business ends up on the balance sheet in, either a profit or a loss, basically, right?
Somewhere,
and
somewhere
it's almost like
out.
you're the doctor of the company, where you're like trying to figure out the health of the company, and it's, keeping on top of it and making sure the body parts are all kind of working in harmony together almost.
And that it's all fully reconciled as well, because, not everything's automated initially. So some information comes in via spreadsheets, and we have to reconcile everything to make sure that we're not missing something. That's where I think the solid controls and the background in terms of the more structured environments comes in, or at least like in my position, I feel that that's helped me enormously.
And through your experience, obviously this is the third exchange where you've, been an early employee and have grown and experienced that incredible growth. Is there any tips or tricks on how to kind of interact with the other executives in the company? Because obviously, right, like what we've been talking about is making sure you've got the right processes and procedures, checking the health of the company, ensuring collaboration. And it's sometimes, you're probably trying to almost maybe pump the brake a little bit on some things while everybody else is trying to go full speed. I kind of liken it to, you're building the aircraft as you're flying it. And so, right.
Really,
and so, like, do you have any ideas or ways that you kind of help to get your points across to the executive committee?
I think, again, it all comes down to open lines of communication. The more you have those open talks, conversations with people, whether it's sitting in a meeting room or catching someone in the kitchen, that's where you learn. That's where you hear sometimes things that are going on that otherwise you're not involved in. I always make sure that I'm talking to not just the senior management team, but also, the other team members who are working on new products, new processes. And then I think it's important, like I said earlier, I think it's really important the executive team get in a room and we talk about stuff, particularly important decisions that we've got to make, or if it's a particularly complex product that we're looking at or process. Because I think sometimes, obviously, we have a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds and like all very smart people, but we all have different ways of thinking about things. if you get in a room together and you talk about things and you say, I don't see how this is going to work, or I think this could be a challenge, you have other people in the room who maybe think the same way, or maybe think a different way, or think about something that you haven't thought about. And I think that's just the most important thing. Having grown so quickly, the communication is the biggest thing. If you don't have the communication, you're going to struggle.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You mentioned being in the same room and being physically together. What, obviously in today's day and age of connection over online, how has that been a problem? Is like, are most of the people based in the office, and it's really trying to foster that culture of going into the office, or how are you managing?
We actually are. We have different office locations. We've got 3 different locations in the UAE itself. We do have people overseas as well. But on the whole, when we have an exco meeting or something, the majority of us try to get into the same room. We have people on Teams as well, but we do find that it's just so much more collaborative when we're sitting in a room together. When you're drawing on a board or something. But no, we're not all together all the time. But I do find that if you're all remote, I think it's easy. If you're all together, I think it's easy. When it's a bit segregated, I think it's more difficult.
Yeah, it's harder to manage that, right? Yeah.
You can make it work. It takes a lot more planning and a lot more structure. So it's difficult in a startup where your day isn't so structured, because you're not sitting here doing the same thing all day, every day. You're running here, something happens there. So it's a little bit more difficult, particularly if it's in your own team. It's a bit more difficult to dedicate that time that you might need to if 1 or 2 people are in a different location, but the rest of the team's in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And just about, team members and teammates and colleagues and stuff, and how you think about hiring into your team. What are some things that you're looking for when you're hiring into, your team or the company as a whole?
Me personally, into my team, I think it really depends on what sort of person you are, and how you operate. I'm a really, really hands-on person. So like I said, I get involved in anything from processing invoices to designing the accounting entries for the process flows for the products into the accounting ledger. So I don't tend to personally look for people with specific background or knowledge. They do need to be very, very strong accountants in terms of understanding the debits and the credits, because the way we operate our team is that we have to actually design all of the accounting entries from scratch, that we then give to our technical engineers, and then they code it, and then everything's automated in terms of the transactions that happen on the exchange platform. So really, I look for people who they're interested to learn, they're eager, they're keen, they don't mind getting their hands dirty. But I don't specifically look for people with crypto or financial services backgrounds, because I have a strong background in those areas. So from a product perspective, even from a technical perspective, if they've got very strong accounting background, generally I can train them, teach them, and that sort of stuff is learnable if you've got the right attitude.
Find the right person and teach them what they need to know when they get in, right? As long as they're a good fit culturally, and they obviously have relevant experience, but you can kind of teach the crypto and side of things.
Yeah, it's really about, how does the team gel together? Does everyone back everyone up? Are you interested to learn? Because it's not easy. It's a really complex business.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about that complexity and kind of about like the accounting function. Obviously, crypto and accounting, it's not an easy type issue, right? It's there's a lot of things you have to think about. How have you been thinking about looking at unique assets? And I know you guys have your own token. I know you've done tons of work on looking at how to account for that. Any insight into how to look at that and formulate
the
that?
way I look at it, what I try to do, I understand the business, I understand what we're trying to do. I then try to look at the accounting standards, which of course have no relevant specific crypto standards, which makes it quite difficult. I try to assess myself what I think we should do and how we would account for something. So I did this with the MMX utility token. And then what I will do is, very early on, I'll write a document myself. I'll then get in touch with our auditors and the technical partners, and I try to have an open conversation with them as early as possible to make sure that my understanding is correct, my proposed accounting treatment is correct, in terms of their technical knowledge. And sometimes we have to reach out to firms who are not in the region, sometimes Singapore, sometimes the US, sometimes they are here. But I do think that trying to open those conversations as early as possible just means that everybody's comfortable when it comes to the year end and your audit. You're not starting those conversations, because the one for our utility token, I think we've had those conversations over 4 to 6 months.
Wow.
It's quite long. Yeah.
Yeah. And auditing in general, obviously, you know, it's a big thing for a company. How has it been finding auditors, you know, your internal auditing function? How has that kind of developed?
It's interesting, actually. It's becoming increasingly difficult across both internal and external audits. Historically, internal audit was easier to source if you're looking from an external audit firm. But even now, many decline to even quote. They just won't take on the risk. External audit is very, very, very difficult. There's maybe one, maybe two. I think it depends on the region. Here, there's 1 or 2 firms that will take on the risk. In Europe, I think there's a couple more. When you're talking about proof of reserves audit for your stablecoin, almost nobody wants to really get involved with that now. So it's becoming really, really difficult. But I think it's really important that we have good quality auditors who understand the business, because, you know, we want some comfort that what we're doing is correct, and somebody independent is reviewing the financial statements. So it makes it quite difficult.
Sounds like a pretty big gap in the marketplace then. Where do you see this heading? Because obviously that's a big problem for companies who can't get anything signed off, right?
It's huge, and we have the added complexity that, you know, we're heavily regulated, so our regulators want to know that our external auditors in particular have relevant experience and knowledge. I'm hoping that over the next couple of years that some of the bigger accounting firms potentially understand this business a bit better, and not particularly my business, but the whole crypto world. And that they start to open up to taking on a bit more risk, particularly in the heavily regulated space. I understand why they don't want to take on some of these audits when it's not regulated, but when you're operating under a very stringent jurisdiction, I think the risk is a bit more acceptable to these firms, or should be.
And what do you think would what does it take to get some of these firms involved and looking at the space? Is it merely education? Is it global regulation? Is it, you know, market perception? What do you think is the big hindrance here?
I think some of it's more knowledge. I think some of it is more education, but I think it's becoming more comfortable with the space in terms of what some of these firms are doing, because it is quite complex. And if they don't see relevant controls, particularly, you know, I get a lot of questions around our AML, KYC procedures. I think the firms themselves have to be willing to take on more risk. It's the same as, you know, banks, insurance companies. I think it's all the same conversation. We talk to the banks, and we're in the UAE. They're trying to make the UAE a hub for the crypto space, fintechs. But then when we try and get a bank account, again, it's very, very difficult. And that's not because of any specific regulation or decision. It's just at a bank level, at a board level, they don't want to take on the risk. So we're operating in this world where it's growing, expanding, and it's a very exciting place to be. But it's almost like some of the infrastructure has not caught up.
And I think you just said the words that every crypto company is shuddering to hear, which is bank accounts. Because I find every company has the same problems. If you are transacting or holding crypto, it is just been very hard to get bank accounts. It doesn't even really matter which jurisdiction you're in, to be honest. I feel like I've spoken to businesses all over the world. They've all had problems. How have you found that process?
As difficult as everyone else. I mean, we maintain lists of banks that we speak to and responses that we get. Every couple of months we reach out again. It's just a really difficult space, particularly when you're talking about dollar. I think some of the euro currencies, Swiss euros, pounds, sometimes can be less onerous. But yeah, in general, it's very, very difficult.
It feels like the kind of the traditional like auditing firms, bank accounts, insurance, they're all kind of like groaning under the, like they don't really know what to do with it, right? They're trying to like kind of shoehorn the industry, I think, into how it's kind of always been done. And obviously there's a lot of new kind of innovation and different things that are happening. And so that's not easy, but it feels like across the board when you're trying to interact with the traditional kind of financial system, it's really, it's tough.
I think they're interested. I just don't think the risk appetite is quite there yet. And then it doesn't help. Not so long ago, FTX blew up, and there's things come out in the news, and it's just like, this isn't helping any of our arguments. The audit firms.
Yeah.
Why would I take on the proof of reserves audit? Why would I take on the audit?
Yeah,
I get
exactly.
it.
And it's one of those things where, specifically in insurance, for the last couple of years, insurers were making good money without writing crypto. So it's kind of like, well, we're already
Why do I
doing
need
well
to?
without writing crypto. Why would we then start writing crypto and potentially have a loss or do something we don't really understand and I could get fired? You know, the situation just keeps going and going and going. And so I'm not sure if it's the same in the other kind of traditional financial industries, but that has been one of the big kind of pushbacks that I've received from underwriters, which is just like, yeah, I could write this, but I could get the same rate writing a traditional, like, bank. Why would I want to stick my neck out on the line? So I think there's just kind of risk and reward almost as well.
I think so. I think some of the banks, when we have conversations with them, there's definitely interest, and they definitely see that this is an area where they can start to get involved. But then when it really comes down to it, they look at jurisdictions, they look at, do we want to go into this space? Often we get the response that you have to have an entity in the country where you're trying to open a bank account, or you have to have a regulatory license. And I understand that, but the problem is that we don't operate in that jurisdiction yet. So that doesn't help.
And talking about jurisdictions, how have you found the UAE? And obviously, you're based in the ADGM, which has, I think, slightly different rules than the rest of kind of the UAE. But how have you found it? Because obviously the UAE has its reputation now of being very open crypto jurisdiction where they've got tons of influx of businesses over a very short period of time. So how has it been in kind of the fray and with all that?
It's been amazing to watch the growth. So when I moved into the crypto space in 2020, there was a handful of entities, of startups really, that were trying to get their licenses. And now there's various regulators. We've got VARA, we've got ADGM, DIFCs looking at regulations. And the number of, not just crypto, fintech, crypto, firms that have moved here, setting up here, custodians, there's a phenomenal amount. So it's actually a really exciting place to be.
And have you found that there's a good community that's developed where you're trying to kind of use each other's services and promote that kind of collaboration so far?
It's starting to happen more. A lot of this growth has really happened in the last, I'd say, around 18 months, where the big boom has come. So I think, there's a lot of conferences happening here now, and that starts to build the community. So you can definitely see the space changing. So when I moved back here in 2006, I think it was, the whole financial center here was very, very small. We had historically Standard Chartered, HSBC, local banks, but they were more on the retail side. There wasn't even really investment banking. Then the DIFC, the Dubai Financial Services Authority, Dubai International Financial Centre, which is regulated by the Dubai Financial Services Authority, they opened up just before I moved here. And then a lot of the big names moved here. Then we had ADGM open up. Now we've got VARA, another regulator. So you've seen the growth within these financial centres. It's been phenomenal in the last 10 years even, but in the last few years, very, very impressive. I think COVID helped in the way that the country dealt with COVID. It was very friendly, it was very business friendly. I believe a lot of companies from Singapore have moved here, headquartered here now. So it's a really impressive growth story.
And so I think it's one of those things where you probably won't really see the entire impact for probably a few years, right? Because it's
I
still,
think so.
you know, if it's
It's
the
still
last
much
growth.
a growth space. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's very exciting to kind of keep watch and keep tabs on it. In terms of other jurisdictions, is there any other jurisdictions you're kind of looking at into maybe expanding to or opening offices or?
Yeah, we're currently in the process of opening our Spanish entity, looking to get our license there. We're talking about, well, we're considering the UK, and then, you know, looking at other jurisdictions that might make sense. But the UAE is our home, so we want the majority of our activities to be here going forward. So we're looking at other licenses that we will apply for here, so we can expand our product set. So yeah, we've got a lot of plans that we're considering and trying to look at where the growth makes sense.
Yeah, brilliant. And one thing that we should touch on is insurance, because that's how we met doing insurance. So from you know, insurance perspective, obviously, the process isn't always straightforward when doing crypto insurance. It can be very convoluted, especially when you're working with companies that have entities in multi jurisdictions, and the jurisdictions have separate, well, regulations for crypto, but then regulations for insurance, and it all kind of multiplies and stuff. So having done the process with you, it wasn't straightforward. But I'd love to understand, you know, how you kind of think about insurance and I guess kind of risk management more broadly, but you know, how M2 kind of looks at insurance and managing its risk.
So, I mean, on the insurance side, aside from the fact that we have requirements from our regulators to hold certain types of insurance, it's obviously very, very important to make sure that the business is insured properly. It's been a really difficult journey back from my 2020 days to now. Even now, it's not so easy, but the process we went through last year was light years away from it was in 2020. I think in 2020 we couldn't even get quotes for certain types of insurances. So it's difficult and it's expensive, but it's something that we as a business, we feel that we should have. It's important to us. So I'm really glad that, you know, we have this relationship and we actually get to the point where we can have insurance, because what I find a lot is that I get brokers contacting me and saying, oh, we can look at your insurance needs and it's no problem, we can write the insurance. And then when it comes down to it, they've never done it before, and you're 3 months down the line and actually they can't get you the insurance.
It's one of those things where there's so much, because the space moves so quickly and there's so much terminology and concepts you have to understand. It's hard for a newcomer to just come in and do it. It's very specialized. It's kind of like accounting, right? In that kind of like, you have to understand what the asset is and like really research it and figure it out to kind of get that perspective. And so, yeah, it's something that, you know, it's taken me years to kind of get to the point of, you know, having a really good understanding of the market and policies and wording and stuff like that. But yeah, it's not easy. But the nice thing is there's two things. One, I think largely once you kind of do that initial onboarding, the subsequent renewals, it gets easier, right? It's like, okay, well, what's changed from what we've done already? Okay, great.
Yeah.
You know, you've already gotten in place, so hopefully the next year should be easier. And two, this is what I've been thinking about recently, is when a crypto company buys insurance from an insurance company, they're not just purchasing insurance for themselves, they're actually giving a vote of confidence in the other industry, in crypto as a whole. And the reason why is because when you're an insurance company and you're venturing into crypto, what you don't want to do is write 1 or 2 accounts. You want to have a bit of a book, a portfolio of different clients. So if you have a claim, that's fine, because the claim is then isolated within the crypto book. Yeah. And so by you guys purchasing insurance, you're actually helping out other companies in crypto, because the underwriters are starting to get more familiar with it. And the more familiar they are, the more coverage you can get, the more premiums water down. And so over time, actually buying a policy now helps not only you, but other companies in the future from having the same thing. And so it kind of creates this, this community of companies that are helping educate these underwriters to then get better terms and better coverage and better price and everything in the future.
Yeah, and I hope that the process does continue to get easier. And I think, again, this comes back to all manner of things, the banking world, the audits. As time moves on and this becomes more mainstream and it's accepted and one firm takes the risk and it works out okay, it opens up, or hopefully will start to open up across the board, and make our lives easier. Because 4 years ago, you can't get a bank account, you can't get any insurance, no one wants to do your audit. How do you operate a firm that then you want to go out to the market and say, we're safe, we're regulated, we've got insurance in place, when you can't get them, we've got no fiat on and off ramps? What do you do? So it's a very difficult sell.
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. How do you start a business when all the services you need won't touch you, right? It's like, it's very constricting. This is one of the things that, so I do a lot of presentations for insurance companies. And one of the things that I open up with is I say, crypto is one of the most discriminated asset classes in the entire world. Because it is, it's, you know, you don't walk into a bank and say, oh yeah, I work in cloud computing. Okay, well, we're not going to give you a bank account, or I do AI or whatever. Like, you know, it's, oh, I do crypto. Well, we're not going to touch it. Right. So it's,
do you know what's really interesting? Actually, now that you mentioned this, even on a personal level, if you work for a crypto related entity and you get your salary transferred to a bank account, the payments can get held up by compliance. I've had it myself.
wow.
Because you're associated with a crypto related entity. Then you try and apply for a credit card or a loan. No, you're blacklisted.
Wow.
From a personal perspective. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, it feels like we won't go down into that rabbit hole, but it just feels like completely, you know, unjust, right? Because at the end of the day, I've met a lot of people that come into this space that genuinely do good because they love the technology and they believe that the financial system should be more open and inclusive and fair for everyone. It's so ironic that we're trying to do that, we get the opposite reaction. So yeah, it's just well, hopefully in the future that all kind of helps
Starts to go away.
gets
Yeah.
better, improves. Yeah.
But then you can understand it. You read what happened, or what did happen, what didn't happen with FTX, what they did, what they didn't do. You can understand why, as an industry, we get a bad reputation.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to what we kind of mentioned of having a mature view of how to run a business, right? And manage risk, because ultimately that's the defining line between having a mature business that can generate profit and do good in the world, and the exact opposite, having fraud and run rampant throughout the organization, right? There's zero checks and balances and controls in there. And I think I kind of look at it as like a natural cleansing of the industry, of kind of getting out that the businesses that kind of operate in that kind of fashion. And what comes out afterwards is businesses that are here for the long term, that have been able to stick around and adhere to those types of processes that actually, let's be honest, they're there to, yeah, it can be frustrating, can kind of slow things down, but they're there to protect people, right? At the end of the day.
I think the retail customers, I don't think they necessarily understand the difference between a non-regulated entity and a regulated entity. They don't understand that my money as a customer is protected, or better protected, under some of the more regulated organizations that are operating. And I don't think as a whole, those regulated entities do a good enough job to try and get that message out into the market.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's, I think we're in a very interesting stage of kind of the crypto life cycle. Feels like we're kind of in that teenager years where we've done all the crazy stuff and we're now trying to like find our way and kind of mature and grow and kind of find that like our way in the world almost. So it's yeah, it's a great place to be in. And especially like if you look at the market now, It doesn't feel like it, but actually, if you look at the prices, we're almost at, kind of all-time highs ever again, and it doesn't even really feel like it. So it's kind of a very interesting place to be. Just before we wrap up, obviously, you've had tons of experience with rapidly scaling companies. You've had to deal with probably some pretty crazy situations, and you've had to build up this resilience, right? And operating in the face of uncertainty, delivering on targets, onboarding people, and kind of, getting through all the chaos that comes with a growing business. Is there anything that, like, any words of wisdom or any ways that you kind of help deal with all that, like, deal with the stress, or, kind of help your own resilience in that?
I think, again, this comes down to personality. I generally deal with stressful situations very, very well. I don't get too stressed. I remain quite calm when I've got 1,000 things to do. I just literally work my way through. Right, let's get this one done. Now let's get this one done. What's the most important? Oh, something else has popped up. I don't flap around. And I think that's quite important. Like, stay focused, be organized, and just get through things, because otherwise you never make any progress. But in terms of stress, I've been in some very stressful situations. Sometimes that gets quite difficult, because sometimes it becomes personal stress as well. The organization I worked for in 2020, COVID years, investor pulled out. It was a pretty terrible time. And so you have the professional stress and the personal stress. And again, I think it's, what's your end goal? What are you trying to do? I knew that we had a great team. We all supported each other. I think that also makes a huge difference. You get on and you try to do as best you can in a situation where sometimes you really have no control over it. You've just got to get through it.
And are you one of those people that can kind of leave work at work, or is it something that when you come home, you close that door, you're still kind of going through it? How do you deal with that?
I'm a bit of both.
Yeah.
I'm very good at leaving the office to make sure I see my kids and I go do some exercise. But then there is also an element, it's a startup. Things go on. I have to pull my laptop back out. I'm on holiday and my laptop's coming out in the car because someone needs something urgently. There is a bit of both. But I do think it's important to sometimes step away, because otherwise it just becomes this never-ending mushroom of things that you need to do, and you never get any time away. You have to get time away, because otherwise your mind's, it's not focused, it's not clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot easier said than done when it's like, you're like, okay, I need to close the laptop, I need to switch off, but then you're just like, oh, I forgot to respond to that guy, or what, and then it just kind of starts going, right?
Mine's when I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, there's 10 things I must remember tomorrow, and I remember one in the morning.
Yeah, I did the same thing. Yeah, it's one of those, it kind of goes back to where we started the conversation, where, when you do decide to kind of take a dive into this industry, if you're new to it, you're not just diving into new technology, but you're kind of saying yes to uncertainty, and yes to, not knowing how it's going to work out, but that you're here to learn something new and be a part of a bigger community. And that's something that's been really kind of been a big thing for me, is like, actually, the community is so diverse and vibrant, and there's so many different aspects to it, and you'll never learn everything, I think, in this. There's always different levels and layers and stuff to it all. And so, yes, even though it can be chaotic and uncertain, and there's a lot of stress that comes with it, at the end of the day, you're part of something bigger. And I kind of look at it as a global movement towards something better than what we've got today. And so that's how I kind of rationalize it. It's worth it, because we are trying to build something that's better, right?
No, it's too. I mean, it's so challenging, but it's so rewarding. I've probably learned more in the last 4 years than I did in the last 14 years.
Wow.
All in a very short space of time. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of learning. You've just got to do it. But it's so rewarding at the end of the day. I love my job. I love the team that we work with. I really, really enjoy it. I suppose you have to, otherwise I wouldn't be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely comes across.
Good.
Well, thank you, Lynsey. I mean, we'll stop there. I know we've got we can probably leave a few minutes for questions if anybody has it. Please just pop it in the chat. We'll do our best to answer it. Let me just open that up. If anybody's got any questions, just pop it in. We'll remain for about a minute or so, but if there's nothing, then we'll give you guys 15 minutes back. Highest level, okay, this is a good one from Brandon. Highest level words of wisdom for Web 2 practitioners entering the space.
Go in with an open mind, I think. Be prepared to learn, get your hands dirty, because it's a slightly different world, slightly more challenging, a lot more challenging. But just be ready to learn.
It's having that kind of like open mindset, right? Of like, yeah, just diving in, learning about it, and yeah, as long as you, as a person, I think, want to always be learning in your career, then this is definitely a good spot to be.
It's definitely a great place to be. If you want to go to work 9 o'clock, leave at 5 o'clock, have nothing bothering you when you get home, don't come into this world.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
certainly
exactly.
not startup.
Yeah, exactly right. Brilliant. Well, oh, another question. A big topic yesterday was collaboration. Have you found yourself collaborating with others outside of your organization at all?
So that's something that we're starting to do more and more now. Up until now, we've really been heavily in the build phase. We launched really last November, so very, very recently. We're still rolling out our product offering, but we're more and more starting to talk about partnerships, collaboration, how we can work with others. So that's something that's going to be a big, big topic for us this year, I think.
Brilliant. Yeah, amazing. Would you recommend any decent sources to learn Web3 stuff from, apart from crypto CFOs, which is definitely brilliant? So yeah, do you have any like good like places you go for learning about upcoming topics in the space?
Try to attend as many conferences as you can. I do a lot of research on the web, just normal Google. Dr. Google's amazing. No, I don't really have any amazing snippets, unfortunately.
Yeah, I subscribe to Blockworks actually, so I get a daily Blockworks newsletter. I think that's fantastic if you're very interested in it. There's also a really good crypto course that A16Z have on their website that it's free. I think it's like a crypto school kind of thing, and you can learn basically everything from it, which is incredible. And I learned a lot through watching Andreas Antonopoulos on YouTube. He's a big Bitcoin figure in the space, and the way he describes what it's all about, the mission, kind of the technology is incredible. So I would definitely recommend that. Crystal says, congratulations on your launch.
Thank you.
Yeah, incredibly successful. So great, guys. Well, we'll pause there. Thank you so much for everything that for everybody joining, for Lynsey, for the use of your time. We really appreciate that. It was an incredible conversation, and yeah, thank you to everyone.
Thank you.